Welcome to Production Music Demystified with MediaTracks Music, a microcast of music works. Today we have the honour of welcoming our guest Simon Bradshaw, a composer and performer with wide knowledge of the music industry. In this episode we'll visit tips on how to pitch your work in the sync market, marketing yourself, contacting sync agents and much more. Before we speak to Simon, here is an advert from our sponsor. Music Works is sponsored by the Musicians Union. I'm a member of the Musicians Union. It's the trade union for musicians living and or working in the UK, and it's a community of 32,000 members working to protect musicians' rights and campaigning for a fairer industry. As well as campaigning to fix streaming and keep musicians working in the EU post-Brexit, the union collectively bargains for musicians working in orchestras and theatres and sets minimum recommended rates for freelance musicians working in other sectors. Its expert staff provide contract advice, legal advice and assistance, and a range of benefits and services to help musicians in every aspect of their work. Be part of something bigger and get the recognition you deserve. Join now at themu.org. Simon, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure.
Today I'm going to talk to Simon Bradshaw, producer, about getting the job and standing out in production music, particularly relating to the sync market. So without further ado, let's kick off. What do people need to know about pitching for work in the sync market, Simon?
Oh gosh, where do you start with something like that? I would say that certainly when you begin this process, it is definitely good to set your expectations appropriately in terms of what level of response and feedback you may get from music supervisors, etc. I think it's important to be super organized. And I'm somebody, like, despite living this sort of like this with this creative job, I quite like a spreadsheet. And I quite like to have things in place. So having your music organized thematically and lyrically and all these sorts of things, or being able to easily cross-reference, I think makes a big difference. I don't know how much to promote other services, but I would say before you start, getting Disco would be a defo.
What's Disco?
So Disco is an online music sort of audio storage facility. So it's a bit like a Dropbox or something like that, but it's specifically designed for the music industry. So you can add really good metadata. Metadata is really important. Sorry, that's another thing. Make sure your metadata is bang on. And the getting it up on Disco is kind of a similar thing, but it's designed specifically for the music business and is kind of industry standard. So whenever you're getting in touch with any music professional that you want to submit your music to, 9 times out of 10 they will want it on Disco. They certainly won't want it as an attachment. It's unlikely they'd want it on Dropbox or iCloud or whatever. So Disco is good. It's a subscription service, but it's reasonably cheap and is great. It's really good, actually. And back to that, getting your ducks in a row thing, it helps you really organize your material. In fact, it's got an auto tagging option within it, which is great. If you spend a little bit more and buy into the sort of premium service, you can literally drag and drop your audio files in, and it will do the kind of metadata for you. It picks out tempo, it picks out the mood, it picks out instrumentation, which is really helpful. Actually, it's not always, it's AI, so it's not 1,000,000% accurate, but it's definitely useful.
Can I just quickly ask, you kind of indicated it there, but for those of us who are wondering what metadata is in this context, what?
Yeah, of course.
What do you mean by that?
Metadata is the information that you attach to each individual audio file, which is about who wrote the track, the name of the track, so some basic information like that, but also into detail around things like publishing splits and contact information. it's really important to get all that in place, because quite often you can submit something to a brief, and the only information that they'll dig out is what will be attached to the metadata within the MP3. So it's important that that information's on there.
That's great, thank you. And I've just
But
been struck by all of these first tips that you've given. They tie in quite nicely with something that we talk about on this podcast a lot, which is sort of like investing in getting everything set up so that it runs smoothly, and so that you can kind of focus in on being creative as much as possible. Because, you know, you've rightly pointed out that, you know, investing in disco will save you time, and also it'll appear more professional, you know, when you're dealing with people who care about that, which is obviously what you will be doing. And there's a direct financial impact of organising your work like that, as it will definitely make you more money.
I think it's a funny thing, isn't it? Because again, in this job is this idea of being able to almost compartmentalize the two different things, and and obviously they link to each other. But the process of writing and creating material needs to be informed by this other side of the business. But it is like having two different heads on. You're essentially your own PR.
Yeah.
Or your own office manager.
Yeah.
So yeah, being aware that it's two jobs that you're doing for free is probably worth before you join this kind of the mayhem that is the sync industry. I would also recommend there's loads of great Facebook groups out there, and other kind of online groups that you can get involved with, where there's lots of people giving advice. There's some people out there who know a whole lot more than me about sync, and have been doing it for many years. So they're worth looking into if you just bang them into Facebook. In terms of then contacting music supervisors, the process I went through, I mean, again, I'm sure there's a million ways to do this, and we'll probably discuss going through publishers later, but if you're doing it independently, I found that basically purchasing a database was a good starting point for me. There's one that I would recommend, actually. There's a few out there, but one I would recommend called the Sync Report, which is, I think it's about like $70-$80 a year or something. It's incredibly up to date. It's incredibly detailed. It's full of names of TV and film supervisors, advertising worldwide, you name it, it's in there. And then, so what I did, certainly when I got started, was I just spent quite a bit of time going through contacting the different names within that. But my advice would be, and this is where the kind of laborious element and the sort of almost data entry element of doing this side of the job comes into it, is that I wouldn't waste your time doing any blanket emails. I wouldn't waste your time kind of doing anything generic. The only way I've ever received responses from pretty much anyone in any area of the music industry is by personalizing the emails that I send. So, and that means looking at the name, seeing what they've done, maybe going into IMDb, looking at their films, and making sure that the email you send has at least a bespoke section to that person that you're addressing. It takes time. Don't get me wrong, it's on time, but I would say the response rate is hugely improved by doing that. So I probably, in the process of doing the sync report, so obviously you send that out with a little show reel and all that kind of stuff. The other thing I would recommend asking in the email is if they'd be okay with you being added to their mailing lists. So that this is kind of, most of my briefs now come from just circular mailing lists that I've been put onto over the years. And if and when you make contact or get a response from any of these industry people, just keeping in touch in what I would call light touch but proactive. So not forgetting about it because you don't want to bother them and all these different things, but not incessantly hammering them with every single track or idea you have. Something around, I mean, I try to do it every 6 to 8 weeks, where I'll just get in touch and say hello and be like, oh, I've just worked on this in case you were looking for anything, and maybe another little show reel. But generally it's just to keep you in mind for when something does come up down the line. So yeah, light touch, there's a phrase, I get a badge, light touch but proactive. Polite but proactive. There you go.
That's really great. I agree completely, and I have to say we pitch for work for composers all the time through my company, and I couldn't agree more. Personalised is the only way to do
Also,
it.
in terms of response rates as well, don't be disheartened, I would say, is another thing, because you can spend an awful lot of time doing this. And if you've sent out 100 emails and you get 10 responses, you're doing quite well, and it doesn't feel like it. But that's really important to have that perspective. Anything around 10%, and that's any response, let alone a positive one, is a pretty strong bit of feedback.
Yeah, I agree with that as well. Would you mind just going into a bit more detail about how you use your mailing list? Because this is really interesting advice.
Yeah.
I do a lot of work on kind of comms approaches for musicians in general, and trying to communicate the importance and also like the potential of a really good mailing list approach is something that I think there's a lot of resistance to it because it feels daunting. So if this is working well for you, I'd love to hear more about how you're doing it.
I mean, there's no getting away from the fact that establishing a mailing list and sort of making it work for you is daunting and really hard work, and not necessarily going to give you the results that you crave. That said, I think it's without representation, and by that I mean strong representation, not just somebody who's really well connected. It's still the best format. It's all about building those relationships. It's all about them thinking that, first of all, you're approachable, flexible. You will not be driving them mad with submissions, but you will hit briefs when they've asked them to, or you'll get things in. And the things that you send that are not way off what they're asking for, and all that kind of stuff. So it is about maintenance. You got to think of it as cutting the grass, really. It's it's something you've got to do to keep it to keep everything smoothly, and for those doors to open up. This is not to say that by having a good, strong mailing list, you're going to suddenly end up getting syncs left, right, and center. This is the most competitive field, or one of the most competitive fields, I would imagine, in the industry. But
it's a tool, though. It's part of the toolbox, isn't it?
Yeah, and you're in the loop, right? You're not on the outside waiting. You're in the loop.
And I love the advice of giving of basically a personalized email, including the question, "Can I put you on the mailing list?" Because that's to me, that's the right balance of, you need to have the mailing list so that you can get your message out without spending your entire life writing personalized emails, but you've gone into it with an understanding of who the person is and a respect for what they do.
Exactly. And ultimately, you're going to be one of the 500 people on their mailing list, right? And that as an opening offer, that's really all they can give you, short of them going, "Oh, I'm writing a film and we need this bespoke," which is an unlikely conceit. It's definitely, if you're on that mailing list, you've got a shot, right? And you're getting things, and then you can, even if you're not getting cuts with them, you are slowly building your reputation as things come through.
Yeah, thank you. So I was just going to say, so now we're exactly responding to briefs.
Yeah, so back to being organized, right? So first of all, give yourself options. That's what I'd say. So have things that you would think you could use off the shelf. So if you've got a decent catalog and that you've got a range of genres and styles and things that you will hopefully, when a brief comes in, be able to go, actually, I've got something that is either completely that, or at least very close to it. So be aware of your catalog and the off the shelf options. If you're writing bespoke, obviously it's a big I think it's a big time commitment. I think it's a really, to get it right and to put the effort in to make sure that you're really hitting that brief takes time and effort, and it is a massive gamble, right? This is not something that is guaranteed. So it's important for me. So now I won't pitch for a brief for free unless I see what I'm doing as something that is usable elsewhere as well. So I have to think to myself, okay, I really want to pitch this brief. It makes total sense for me. It's in my wheelhouse, and I could do this with a couple of days. But on the assumption that I don't get it, what would I do with that? Where's it going to sit? Would it work with another artist somewhere? Can it go to a production music library? Can it, how will this make sense so that it isn't not wasted time, because nothing, it's all development, but has a purpose beyond the initial brief.
Well, it has a value as well. So yes, it's not wasted time, but also it's not necessarily it doesn't necessarily have a value attached to it unless you have thought about that in advance.
I mean, because I did it for years, and then I would sit and look at my hard drive and go, "Oh my god, I've got like 20 songs here that have taken me to at least 2 days each to put together, and they live on my hard drive. They're never going to really exist anywhere else."
Yeah.
They will often say that they're open to ideas. I'm going to throw this out there. They're not. Like, I think they want to give that appearance and be like, yeah, if you've got anything that you know, be creative with this. They want that to be the, you know, feel like that's the agenda. In my experience, it is not the agenda. They have a very, very specific idea of what they want, and it is contained in that brief. Especially if there's an existing track in place. So if you start getting briefs that says, you know, we currently it's this track by this famous artist that they can't clear for whatever reason, or you know, we want it to sound like this track, what they mean is they want it to sound like that track. Like they don't mean like, oh, this is a bit like that. They mean basically they want that track but can't afford it, so, or can't clear it, or whatever it might be. So there's something about putting a little bit of you know, like genuinely listening to the track, thinking about the tempo, thinking about the chords, the type of chord structure, not necessarily the same chords, the production style, the vocal style, and being as tight to it as you can. I mean, it's never going to be plagiaristic, because it's always going to be infused with your personality, your direction, your equipment, all of these things. But I think that being as tight to the brief as you can be, two things: it definitely gives you a better chance of getting it, but it also shows that you're willing to play by the rules. They've sent you what they want, and you're doing that. Now, that's not to say that I wouldn't send a wild card as well. I mean, if in my dream scenario for a brief, I'll send two that I think are tight to the brief, or two examples that I think are close. And then I'll probably send something that I think matches thematically or lyrically that doesn't necessarily tie to the brief, because I still think it's worth displaying your breadth and giving. You never know with another option, of course. But yeah, I think getting used to like, oh, I've got to really try and do this. And actually, it's a challenge as a producer and a songwriter in itself to do that anyway.
Kind of toes a really thin line between your own creativity and vision and being able to follow a brief. And
two different jobs.
Two different jobs. Feel like it's more than two different jobs.
Not many jobs.
Because then you've got the admin.
Yeah, exactly. But even as someone who's creative and writes their own stuff, I can very much put my head in different game. If I'm writing for an artist, I don't write them what I would write for myself, right? It's not. You know, this is all part of the breadth of the challenge of certainly being a producer. It's different, I guess, if you're an artist and you want to kind of establish yourself as a writer, performer, all these kinds of things, and sync isn't necessarily your first port of call. But a lot of that's how artists are breaking now, through sync. So it's definitely worth, towing the line to a degree, even if it is just to build your reputation that you can do that. And actually, I love all that. Like I'm never prouder than when I've written something that is completely out of my comfort zone and it sounds like it. I managed to get a cut on a K-pop record a couple of years ago. I have no relationship with K-pop whatsoever, other than loving it. Like, I've certainly never written any of it. I'm largely a garage musician who makes a horrible racket on a guitar. And then I got this brief and kind of, managed to kind of network my way through to getting the cut. I'm so proud of that, because it was so out of my comfort zone, and totally worthwhile.
Fantastic, great. And then I think the next stage is dealing with publishers. Is that right?
Yeah. So I wrote this phrase here, which is where pitch briefs go on to live a happy life.
I love that.
The point I was trying to make before was that I ended up. So a good example of this. I ended up, after I had got that K-pop cut, very briefly, lots of K-pop labels and producers wanted to work with me. So I suddenly found myself pitching for all kinds of like K-pop sensations that were amazing. And I must have done 6, 7, 8 of these. And again, you know, so many people doing this sort of stuff. And even though I'd managed to get this cut, not one of them got picked up. So I was instantly, oh, well, I've spent ages on this. Like I've got all these tracks that I think are really good and they work. So, you know, ultimately what they will do, if you have a great publishing label, whether that be a traditional publisher or a production music label or wherever it might be, it's really important to have an idea of which of these labels, if you're not exclusive, might be interested in the material you're producing, even if it doesn't work out in terms of a pitch. So I luckily I know a few production music labels, and I have a conventional publisher as well, where there are opportunities for me to place this material. But having those ideas in your mind about, well, what if this pitch doesn't work out, what project can I turn it into, and then where could I potentially get that placed?
Yeah, absolutely. So just making sure that the value of the work you're creating is not just all tied into one potential opportunity.
It's the same as, I mean, it's still work because, you know, you may have pitched one track, and then of course to make it relevant to a production music label, you'll then have to kind of produce an album's worth of that sort of stuff, or an EPs at least. But at least it's like, you know, if you've done it and you've enjoyed it and you think, oh yeah, okay, I can pitch this track to a library or a publisher. If they like it, then at least you know you're in a position where it's going to get published, and then you hopefully will recoup that way. In terms of labels, you know, I still think just looking at existing catalog is the most important thing when you're looking for a publisher or a library or whatever it might be. Look what they do. Like there's a reason why they're doing what they're doing, and the reason why they're looking for what they're looking for. I think that's really important before you send anything. Are they MCPS, PRS library? I think is really important to know and understand, and gives you an idea of kind of the likelihood of cuts, but also their quality and reputation.
Yeah.
I think the size of the label, so I work with some really big libraries and publishers, and I work with some really small independents, and I think understanding your place is important, whether you're the tiniest fish in the biggest pond, and how that could potentially work for you if the label is powerful and has influence, or is it better for that material to sit on a medium-sized label where you might be more of a priority? These are things to weigh up for each release, really.
Yeah, absolutely.
And listening to what they want is the other thing as well. Like, I think quite often people turn up and go, I've done this record, do you want it? And actually contacting a publisher with a show reel and then saying, what do you want, can be really effective, because they've all got things in mind that they know there's gaps for, or they know they can sell, or they know does well. And if you're willing to work from a brief from a publisher, then that's got a really, really good potential knock-on effect as well.
Absolutely. So, what kind of things to be weighing up when you're looking at an existing library? Because again, we give this advice a lot about people who are looking for agent representation as well. You look at who they already represent, and you think, and then you have the question: if you're a young pianist, you say, well, if you only represent young pianists, do I fit, or do I just become part of a big pool? So it's, where does it sit in this context? Like, if you're looking at a library, do you want to be slotting directly in and like completely aligned with that, or do you want to be an outlier, or what would you say about that?
Yeah, and both things can have their bonuses, can't they? Like if you get into a smooth running train that is, constantly getting cuts for a certain kind of material, then potentially you want to be a part of that. But then if you're the only person doing a certain thing, then again, when those briefs come up, you'll be the one, you might be less often represented, but you will potentially get more opportunities going from that direction. It's a lot to weigh up, but the meeting the people, I think, is really important, and again, back to just building those relationships. I think that most people are honest, actually. Don't get me wrong, I've worked with plenty of people, not that I would consider dishonest, but that I pretty quickly worked out we weren't necessarily on the same page. Any label that is willing to give you the time of day to speak to you about what you're doing, to offer advice, to listen and give constructive feedback, You know, there's not many that actually do that. You know, there's a lot that, you know, let's face it, they're inundated with submissions of, you know, largely stuff that they don't want to work with. So if they've taken the time to actually speak to you and make contact and build a relationship, I think that's really, you know, that's possibly the biggest thing, whether they're big, small, or somewhere in the middle. They're definitely not doing that if they don't see potential for revenue down the line. You know, this is you know, they're not doing it as a favor. Like, this is something that they're building a business. I think looking at the amount of releases is really important, certainly on a production music label, because I think some labels believe it's a numbers game, and there's an element of truth to that, because, you know, you want to provide new and refreshed content and as many options as possible. Particularly, as I was saying before, if briefs are that specific, you want to try and touch, you know, cover as many bases as you can. But if a label's putting out 50 albums a month, then where do you sit there? You know, how important are you? And I think it's a fine line and a fine balance to sort of work through.
Yeah, great. It's very interesting, isn't it? How a lot of it, as you say, it does come down to relationships and finding the right people to work with. And there's just such a range of experiences that you can have with all the different approaches. And as you say, the big companies and the smaller companies, and yeah,
and all have their positives and negatives and everything like that.
Yeah.
But I would say, you know, you can slightly trust your instinct. What I wouldn't do, and which I've done many times, is get excited. You get sucked in because someone's given it some attention, or, you know, someone's not promised something, but suggesting certain things can happen. Now, like, I mean, if there was ever an industry to take things with a gallon load of salt, it's this one, right? It's definitely, people say things all the time that they may genuinely believe at that point, but if it sounds too good to be true, it's not true. So, you know, be try not to get drawn into it just because it's, you know, it's an exciting thing to be making and releasing albums and all that. Remember your own worth, remember your own value, make sure you've got options. And also, like, I never lose sight. I tell you what, Katie, this is the things, like, it's brilliant, isn't it? Like, I mean, what a thing to do for a bit of a job. Like, I write songs for people. I mean, that's mad that it exists, and that I'm allowed to do it in any context, whether it's the biggest cuts or the smallest. You know, it's. I never lose sight of the fact that it's a brilliant thing to do, and whether you're making money out of it or not, and all these sorts of things. You know, it is. Yeah, it's very easy when things aren't going well, or you're lacking money, to get really bogged down in feeling negative about the whole thing. But actually, you know what? Every time I finish a piece of music, I'm never happy. You know, when I go and play it in the car and listen to it really loud. You know, that's the high point, right, of the month.
Absolutely. Oh, that's great. Thank you. Thanks
Yeah,
for
no worries. Well, thank you very much
Um,
for having me, Katie. It's appreciated.
Thank you very much indeed. Thanks for joining us.